Well, I came to University of South Carolina in 1967. My first year was a very interesting year. You had the students who were killed in Orangeburg as a part of the Orangeburg Massacre. Martin Luther King was killed and Robert Kennedy was killed. When Charles B. Hamilton and Stokely Carmichael wrote the book, Black Power, there was a self-identification with being black, using the term black to refer to you rather than Negro or colored, and students were advocating for having organizations of African American students. I was involved with Harry Wright and other leaders on campus in establishing what we call AFRO, the Association of African American Students. There was also a demand that we have Black Studies courses. It really kind of got started when a professor, Dr. Thomas Terrell, had the first Black History course, and I took that course.
In '69, I started the class. There were 42 people in the class, roughly 50-50, African American and white. My assignment was a book a week. We didn't have a textbook.
As a part of the original proposal that we made, the program started out as a minor. Harry Wright, Dr. Marshall, and myself were part of the process that interviewed Willie Hereford. Willie Hereford became the first director of the African American Studies and was instrumental in the development of the program.
My father was the first African American administrator at the University of South Carolina and professor following Reconstruction. He came here in 1972. It was hard in the beginning because it was the university in the 70s was not a very inviting place. You didn't talk to white students and white students didn't talk to you. And there wasn't any stress. I mean, in classroom, you certainly interacted with people, but we had nothing in common. And there were certain places where you just didn't go at all. There were very few places that you could go to talk about exactly what problem you were experiencing. And he was the guy who you went to help you get through this place. And for many years, students, faculty, administrators, they didn't feel like it was even a real program. And it's not something that you can fight with words. You have to really back it up with action. I don't think he had any thought about where it would be in the future. It was enough just trying to deal with it then.
When I came here, the university had me speak at a conference, and I told them that I felt like I was lost in a sea of whiteness. When the university integrated and we came, the university did nothing to make this place comfortable for Black students. We had to change the place. But I've admired the program from a distance. I've known all the people that were the directors of it. I was very close to Grace Jordan McFadden.
She was here on campus for a number of years. The Department of History became very interested in her background and offered her a position as an instructor. She was teaching a course with Willie Hereford in the History and the Black Studies program. Not only to teach a course, but they asked her to be a lecturer and then eventually a director.
We were among the first that was going to make sure it was an Afro-American study. We started all the
He was Reverend Macmillan. She started between 73 and 74, and then was in African American Studies from 74 to 90. Both Dr. McFadden and Dean Hereford talked about Black excellence, and what does that mean, and what does that look like. That group, they were unapologetically Black, unapologetically brilliant, and then they were also unapologetically bold. And they wanted us, the future generations, to succeed and stand on their shoulders.
Even when I was a student here, and of course the founder of the program, Willie Hereford, taught me, he made it clear that this is what he was seeking to do. He was seeking to delegitimate this notion of the Black invisibility in American life. And so I am trying to do the same thing, following in his footsteps with my students.
So I was an undergraduate student in 1977, and I graduated from the university in 1981. I recall being the only Black person in a lot of situations, but to counter that, I joined organizations or participated in step shows and things that the Greek organizations were doing, and anything African American Studies sponsored. The late Dr. Roland Haynes, and he was a professor of psychology, so he was my first and only Black professor at the university. And he would tell us, how are you going to learn more about the Black experience if you don't go do things related to and for Black people?
When I was at USC as an undergraduate, there were just numerous activities that was always on campus. And they were sponsored by African American Studies and the Office of Minority Student Affairs at that time. It was nothing to see Asa Hillard, Naeem Akbar, Maya Angelou,
Grover Washington Jr., live poetry with Nikki Giovanni. So I think African American Studies sponsored that event.
I was a friend of Grace Jordan McFadden's, and she made sure to really take care, especially of the African American women who were here. We went to her home often for lunch, and she shared her experiences with us. And her experiences were sad in a way, but it's so important for all of us as African American professors to have really balanced lives, because if we look nationwide, we will see that there really is a high mortality rate for especially Black women in academia. I don't think Dr. McFadden's work was for naught, right? I see real growth in the African American Studies program that I'm happy about. We have wonderful people like this on the faculty.
Previously, I met several of the directors, one being Dr. Grace McFadden, Dr. Diane Johnson, Willie Harford. He was one of the directors at the program. And I took courses through the African American Studies program, so I knew what it was all about. And the director at the time, they were housed in a little corner in Gambrell Hall in the basement. And the program didn't have much exposure.
I was a business manager for African American Studies. I came in 2008. I went through 4 directors, starting with Dr. Sellers, hired me in 2008, who was, of course, a trailblazer for South Carolina.
We had to create a space for the African American Studies program that we envisioned. And so it was at that point that we had the opportunity to have a president who wanted to increase the number of minority students at the university. And we went back to making it interdisciplinary, so that the people who would come would be African American Studies professors, but their area would be political science, anthropology, social work, or whatever it might be. We found the Simmons, both of them, Dr. Donaldson from Emory, the Littlefields, and so we were popping, and we were able to get Dr. Billingsley.
We had a grant that we was awarded first year 2002, $20,000 for the community with the Smalls Lecture through Dr. Andrew Billingsley. Robert E. Smalls Lecture was one of the things that made African American Studies program very exciting, very interesting, and a lot of public relations came through those lectures.
After him was Dr. Stephanie Mitchum. Her discipline was in religion, and then Dr. Val Littlefield.
Robert Smalls Lecture, the community shows up. They come out in full force. We bring in some of the best speakers, people who are not only academicians, but they're also community oriented. Actually, one of our hires came out of a Robert Smalls lecture, Nikki Finney. I spent a tremendous amount of time hiring. We went from 4 faculty members to 12. A program runs like a department. The community expects you to do things for them and to be active in the community. And I believe in that. So when I started, we had 1 staff person, and that was it. There was just 2 people. We hired Frenchie Brewer. We hired Nancy Tolson as an associate director.
I've known African American studies or Black culture all my life. My parents made sure to give me Black books, Black dolls, Black games, Black everything. I have always wanted to be in an African studies program after that. And I was very impressed with this one. And when the position came up, I felt like it was for me.
For a time, I was the interim director of African American Studies. I worked very closely with Valerie Ashford. The director of African American Studies is an important spokesperson in many respects. It's called upon. It's called upon by the community at times to answer questions. It's called upon members of the faculty. It's called upon students.
My goal, the 4 years that I was here, was to make this a better place for everybody who came here after me. I was involved in starting the first Greek letter organization on campus, Kappa Alpha Psi. I was involved in being the campaign manager and helping Harry Walker become the first Black student body president. So my goal then was to make this place more relevant for Black students.
No, we really didn't talk about that. He was very humble, so he didn't really bring that up. Even when I applied and wrote my letter, it didn't come up. It was my second year with Ramon Jackson that I had a class that was with Dr. Cleveland Sellers as well. And we had to do a project at the end, and my project, I think I was gonna do it on somebody else, but then my dad's name was on the list, and I was like, oh, I can't pick his name. And Ramon Jackson was like, yeah, you should pick his name. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I should. And I just started doing the research, and I was like, wait a minute, what?
Very little attention is given to Black leadership, with the exception of Martin Luther King, which lends the impression that Black people have not made major contributions to the onward march of American civilization. And what we're trying to do in AFAM is we're trying to dispel that notion, to dispel that myth, to dispel that fallacy.
The program was more like a motherhood type for the students and fatherhood. Some of the professors just took the students on as if they were their children. Dr. Littlefield, Dr. Sellers, Bobby Donaldson, all those professors, students would leave and come back after they graduate just to come, to the African American Studies program.
And I think that the faculty and the staff are continuing that legacy of what I said: bold, brilliance, and unapologetic.